In support of the military, dozens stage protests in the Sinai to condemn an attack on the army. Not our problem, East African leaders vent over DR Congo conflict. And African researchers make gains in the fight against malaria. Hello and welcome to Africa Live, where we bring you African and global news from all perspectives. I'm Famida Miller. Now, also coming up in the next half hour. Zambia mines divestiture. Africa's largest copper producer plans a comprehensive sell-off of mining assets. Ethiopia hosts African champions Nigeria in a World Cup qualifier this weekend. And Bafana coach Gordon Ingerson believes the Walia Antelopes can spring a surprise. Dozens of supporters of Egypt's military protested in anger following an explosion at a state security building in South Sinai that killed 2 people on Monday. At least 48 others were injured during that attack. A witness says the explosion was caused by a car bomb. In a separate incident, gunmen killed 5 Egyptian soldiers near the Suez Canal city of Ismailia. The series of attacks highlight growing insecurity since the army ousted former President Mohamed Morsi. In the most brazen attack of the day, security officials say assailants fired a rocket-propelled grenade at a state-owned satellite station in the Mahdi suburb of Cairo on Monday, wounding 2 people. Militant violence elsewhere in Egypt raised fears that an Islamist insurgency similar to the one eventually crushed in the 1990s by then President Hosni Mubarak could take hold beyond Sinai. Meanwhile, Egypt's interim president visited Saudi Arabia on Monday in his first foreign trip, highlighting a regional realignment. Underscoring the tightening of relations between the 2 regional powerhouses, Adli Mansour was greeted in Riyadh airport by the kingdom's defense minister and Crown Prince Salman. Mansour then met with King Abdullah, who was quoted in the state-run Saudi press agency as saying his kingdom is standing against any attempts to touch Egypt's internal affairs, particularly by terrorists. Saudi Arabia has cemented itself as the new Egyptian leadership's staunchest supporter since President Mohamed Morsi was ousted in July. Saudi Arabia has showered the interim government with $5 billion in critical aid and led a foreign diplomacy blitz with Western nations to soften their stance toward the coup that ousted Egypt's first democratically elected president. Let's now cross to Adel Maru. He's standing by in Cairo. Adil, now give us the latest from the Sinai. And we also understand that the Muslim Brotherhood has planned protests for later today. What more do you have on that?
Well, basically today they're planning to paralyze the entire country's traffic system. They say that they will hold protests. They will not be big masses together moving from one place to the other like what happened on Sunday, but they will go down in small groups trying to block every single road, not just in Greater Cairo but in the rest of the major cities of the country. This is mainly to show out their number, at least this is the cause they explain, to show out their numbers, and they are capable of freezing the entire streets of the entire country. But this is also a test. It's a test for their Friday's protests, which they are planning once again to try to approach and set a camp in Tahrir Square, which was the main reason that security forces clashed with them on Sunday, trying to push them back from that square that has become a remark of their strife against the military coup, as they describe it, and the government is saying that they're trying to prevent this from what they say, quote, terrorists.
Now, Adil, we've also seen that President Adli Mansour is in Saudi Arabia. Now, Saudi Arabia appears to have a significant political role in Egypt. Why is that?
Well, Saudi Arabia was one of the first countries in the Gulf and the world to stand by what happened in Egypt since President Morsi was ousted. While the entire, particularly Western nations and some Arab countries were describing it as a military coup, Saudi Arabia said this is the demands of the Egyptian people. And when Qatar, for example, withdrew billions of dollars of aid from Egypt, which was previously promised, Saudi Arabia stepped in to give aid to Egypt, billions of dollars, and more are to come. So Saudi Arabia have been standing by side with Egypt, and as you know, it's the greatest of the 6 Gulf countries, and it's all Gulf countries, and leadership has described the Saudi king as their godfather, and therefore it was a significant move that then made the United Arab Emirates and Kuwait all together push forward for more support to the interim government in a time that the rest of the world was trying to impose sanctions to freeze their aid or even military assistance. And that's why it's very important. That's why it was very keen. Even when President Morsi was in power, he was very keen to make Saudi Arabia one of the first countries that he goes to visit. And the same happens with Adli Mansour. Adli Mansour, this is his first international visit since he was inaugurated as an interim president. And the support of Saudi Arabia through the coming period until Egypt stabilizes will be very important to fuel the funds, and particularly in foreign currency for Egypt, while the country political instability would of course affect and is expected to affect more the economic situation here.
Now, exactly, Adil, we do understand the economic implications of that visit, but how is it being viewed in Egypt?
Well, it has been viewed, it depends. There have been some powers, even within those who support the interim government. Some of them believe that interim President Adli Mansour should not be having an international tour representing Egypt, particularly that he was not elected as president, and therefore his prime mission to these voices is only to monitor the transitional period in Egypt, and therefore only focus on the formation of a new constitution, reconciliation talks, and preparations for the parliament and next presidential elections. Beyond that, they criticize any move by Adli Mansour, whether to form legislations or to have international visits. That's one side. But for those who believe that he should be doing this, and it's the counter argument basically is that he's trying to look after the safety of the country, to give support to the tarnished economy, has been for quite a year, at least since the 2011 uprising. This is from one side. The other side, the opposers, the Islamic extremes, they believe that Saudi Arabia is conspiring with the army against them. And therefore they do not recognize these visits, and they believe it's part of a bigger picture that they say is a war against Islam. So this is the general view among the several parts or several sects here in Egypt.
All right, Adil Marouki, we'll leave it there for the moment. Thanks very much. Now, a delegation of United Nations Security Council members has met with Rwandan President Paul Kagame in Kigali, as well as President Yoweri Museveni in Kampala, after spending 2 days in the DR Congo. The leaders of the two countries told the envoys that it was not their responsibility to bring peace to their neighbor. Maria Galang tells us more.
Members of the UN Security Council paid a visit to the presidents of Rwanda and Uganda in an effort to find a way to end the conflict in neighboring DR Congo. However, Kagame and Museveni say it is not their responsibility to bring peace to the region. Britain's UN Ambassador Mark Lyle Grant told reporters the leaders said that they felt President Kabila had made a lot of mistakes and that he didn't have control of his own troops, and that was the fundamental issue. The delegation spent 3 days in the DRC and in the leg in Kibati village Goma, an area once occupied by the M23 rebels and now under the control of the Congolese army.
Up to now, the M23 is still recruiting, training and killing the civilian population, and also abducting people in the positions they are occupying.
Later on, the council mission also visited Mugunga IDP camp for internally displaced persons and had a chance to hear from villagers expressing their frustrations with the political process, the regional violence, and their needs to go back to their normal lives.
For us, the visit has no meaning because Ban Ki-moon was here himself as the chief of the UN. He did nothing. the atrocities are still going on in Kibumba and Rutshuru. So what is the Security Council coming to do?
DR Congo's volatile east has long been mired in conflict and is bristling with armed groups. UN experts have accused Rwanda of supporting the M23 rebels, a charge that Kigali has rejected. Maria Galang, CCTV.
Suspected Islamist militants hit the northern Malian city of Gao with artillery fire on Monday, the first attack on the insurgents' former stronghold in months. Gao was the first city freed from Islamist occupation by a French-led military intervention in January. Gao bore the brunt of the guerrilla war waged by survivors of the insurgency that was defeated following the January military offensive. Until Monday's incident, the area had not seen an attack since May. Mali's new president, Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta, was elected in August, having promised to make security a top priority. The country continues to battle the remaining Islamist militant groups which occupied the north of the country for over 9 months. Africa Live now takes a quick break. When we come back, African researchers make gains in the fight against malaria. And hold on, a logistics nightmare delays Guinea poll results announcement.
We follow the latest trends in global politics, economics, culture and sport, and how Africa fits into the global picture. You decide what's important.
We need some trade justice.
Africa's future will be determined by Africa.
For women's equal opportunity, for a better life.
We have to change something, and it's not the outsiders.
Talk Africa, a new voice for the world.
Welcome back. The first vaccine against malaria could be available by 2015. That's emerged at a malaria conference in South Africa. The vaccine's been tested on more than 15,000 children across the continent and at almost half the number of malaria cases. Developer GlaxoSmithKline is to seek regulatory approval for the vaccine next year. Experts say it could be a major breakthrough in the fight against the killer disease. Well, that's just one of the highlights from the conference so far. CCTV's Renee Delcom has more.
Delegates here have been presenting research data exploring ways to combat drug resistance because they say it threatens to undermine the progress that's been made in malaria control. They say new drugs are needed to address drug resistance in malaria patients as well as resistance to insecticides needed to kill mosquitoes, which transmit malaria parasites. New drug development is also high on the agenda at this malaria conference, but many of those drugs will only be on the market many years down the line. Meanwhile, experts say they are hard at work looking at other ways of saving lives. Renee Delcom, CCTV, Durban, South Africa.
Well, some countries in Africa are already making gains in controlling the effects of the deadly disease. Zimbabwe is one of them.
Zimbabwe is one of the success stories in Africa's fight against malaria.
We used to record about around 3,000 deaths and around 2 to 3 million cases in a year. But for the past 3 or so years, we have been recording around 350 deaths in a year.
This is due to sustained preventive measures, such as household spraying and the distribution of treated mosquito nets, all free in the most malaria-prone areas. Within 7 years, officials hope to eradicate new infections within Zimbabwe, but they remain alert.
In our country, 70% of the population is rural. And of the population, which is about 12 million, about 50% of that population is at risk of contracting malaria.
Expectant mothers and children under the age of 5 are the most vulnerable. The country is stepping up the fight by switching focus from control to pre-elimination. Matabeleland South, a province that borders Botswana and South Africa, is the pilot region for this new approach.
The difference between pre-elimination and control is that in control, you get patients coming to the health facility, they are treated, they go back home, and you wait for patients to come. But in pre-elimination, when you see a case which comes to the health facility, that case is supposed to be followed to the village.
The entire village is then screened and treated where necessary. Cases that come in from outside Zimbabwe are reported to the country of origin so that similar action can be taken there too. This is part of a cross-border program that targets vulnerable border towns. The cross-border malaria program is part of a broader regional initiative where countries in SADC are aiming to completely eliminate malaria by the year 2020. Ahead of that, though, Zimbabwe is aiming to reduce the 300 or so annual malaria deaths to near zero within the next 2 years. Zimbabwe is well ahead of schedule. Officials here are confident that within the next 2 years, no more Zimbabweans will die from malaria. Farai Mwakutuya, CCTV, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Now, in other news making headlines, Guinea's Electoral Commission says it could be days before provisional results are available from the West African nation's first legislative elections in more than a decade. A commission spokesperson had earlier said provisional results would be available Tuesday, that's 72 hours after Saturday's vote. But Commission Vice President Alhaji Ibrahim Khalil Keita told journalists on Tuesday the results would not be made public until 72 hours after they had all been collected from polling stations around the country. The process is still ongoing. The opposition's criticized the announcement, saying there's no legitimate reason for the delay. Former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan delivered the third annual Desmond Tutu International Peace Lecture. This was in Cape Town on Monday. Annan attended the lecture with South Africa's Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu, who celebrated his 82nd birthday earlier in the day. In his speech, Annan, who was head of the UN from 1997 to 2006, called for Africans to turn their backs on the winner-takes-all approach to politics. The Desmond Tutu International Peace Lecture was conceived as an annual opportunity to take stock of issues critical to the world, such as tolerance, respect, compassion and fairness. United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon has expressed concern over the recent decline in official development assistance. Speaking at a General Assembly high-level dialogue on financing for development, the Secretary General said predictable levels of ODA remain critical for many developing countries, particularly the most vulnerable. Ban Ki-moon encouraged all countries to fulfill their pledges and meet their ODA targets. Official development assistance is a term widely used as an indicator of international aid flow. Well, let's move over to Rama now, who's got the latest business news.
Thank you very much, Famida. Here's what's coming up on business.